Hi.
The first thing I noticed was the smell of her perfume. It had been subtle at first, an odd hint of something unfamiliar. I couldn't place it exactly, but I noticed it the moment Clara walked into the kitchen, her presence filling the room like it always did. But that day, it was different. It wasn't the usual lavender or jasmine that she wore every day. This one was sweeter, deeper, almost like, I don't know, a man's cologne, mingling with her scent. I didn't say anything, of course. I tried to brush it off. Claire and I had been together for 8 years. I had to trust her, right? But the doubt, once it sneaks into your mind, doesn't leave. It gnaws at you. It's a tiny crack that slowly widens until it splits everything apart. I didn't confront her immediately. I couldn't. My mind was racing with thoughts that I wasn't ready to face. But over the following days, I started noticing more things. Little things that didn't add up. Things I should have noticed earlier. Clara was often on her phone, and when I'd walk into the room, she'd quickly put it down or turn it over, like she was hiding something. Her texts weren't like they used to be, quick, brief, to the point. Now, she'd spend longer periods on her phone, always texting someone with a kind of energy I hadn't seen before. She'd laugh that wasn't meant for me. But it wasn't just the phone. There were other things too. A few weeks ago, she changed her wardrobe. Not drastically, but enough to raise my suspicions. The soft, modest dresses she usually wore were replaced with tight, form-fitting outfits. Clothes that screamed attention. Claire was never that kind of person. And then there was the late-night work meetings she'd have. I'd hear her on the phone in the living room, speaking to someone in a low voice, but not enough to understand the words. She'd always be vague when I'd ask who it was. Just some colleague, she'd say. But there was something off about it. Something that didn't sit right with me. The breaking point came 2 weeks ago when she came home late, even though she had promised me she'd be back by 7. I remember it like it was yesterday. I was sitting on the couch, flipping through channels mindlessly. It was almost midnight when she finally walked in, her face flushed, hair slightly disheveled. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice shaky. "There was a last-minute meeting." I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, waiting for the excuse to sound more convincing. But something about her body language gave her away. She was nervous. Her hands trembled slightly as she placed her purse down. And then, when she pulled her coat off, I noticed it, a tiny lipstick stain on her collar. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw things, but I didn't. I stood up and walked out of the room, trying to control my breath, trying to gather myself. But I couldn't. I just couldn't. The words slipped out before I even realized what I was saying. "Clara, who are you sleeping with?" She froze. For a second, she didn't move, didn't even breathe. Her eyes darted around the room like she was looking for a way out. Then she turned slowly, her voice barely a whisper. "Ethan, what are you talking about?" But the look in her eyes, the guilt in them, told me everything. I didn't need her to say anything else. I knew. I knew she had been hiding something. And now I had to know the truth. "I saw the lipstick," I said, pointing to the stain on her collar. "Whose is it?" She looked down at her coat, her hands trembling as she tried to wipe it away. "It's nothing," she muttered, "but I wasn't having it." "Don't lie to me." "You've been lying to me for months, Clara. What's going on?" She sank down onto the couch, her hands covering her face. Her shoulders shook as she started to cry, but it wasn't the kind of crying I expected. There was something different about it. Finally, she looked up at me, her face red, her eyes swollen. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she whispered. It just did. I didn't understand. "What are you talking about? What happened?" And then it spilled out. Her colleague. The one she'd been working with on some project for months. The late nights. The phone calls. The business trips. "Clara," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "Tell me you're not sleeping with him." She hesitated. Just for a moment. But that moment felt like an eternity. Finally, she nodded, barely audible. "Yes. I'm sorry." I felt like the air was knocked out of me. My knees buckled and I stumbled back into the chair. My heart raced and I couldn't breathe. The woman I had trusted more than anything in the world had betrayed me. Betrayed everything we had built together. But it wasn't just the affair. It wasn't just the fact that she had slept with James. It was the lies. The secrets. The betrayal of everything she had promised me when we got married. It was the realization that everything we had, all these years, might have been a lie. But I didn't say anything. Not yet. I couldn't. I needed proof. I needed something more than just her admission. I needed to see it, to know the full extent of what had happened. That night, I lay awake in bed, listening to her quiet sobs. I didn't comfort her. I couldn't. I just stared at the ceiling, trying to make sense of everything. How could I have missed it? How had I not seen it? The next morning, I waited. I told her I needed to go to the office. But really, I just needed to see if she would leave. I watched her leave for work. I followed her, keeping a safe distance behind her. I was calm, too calm as I watched her head toward her car. But instead of driving straight to the office, she turned toward James' apartment. I could hardly breathe as I watched her park, walk up to his door and ring the bell. A few seconds later, he opened the door. He kissed her right in front of me. And that was it. That was the proof I needed. I didn't confront her that day. Not yet. I couldn't. But I knew. I knew everything now. The affair wasn't just some one-time mistake. It was something that had been going on for months. And now, there was no going back. I stayed in the car watching them. Watching her. The woman I had married, the woman I had built a life with, was standing there in his arms. And all I could think was, how could she do this to me? How could she betray me like this? How could she betray everything we had? But that's the thing about betrayal. It isn't just the act itself. It's the slow unraveling of everything you thought was true. The slow realization that the person you loved, the person you trusted, was capable of something you could never have imagined. I spent the next few days in a fog. Every time I saw Clara, it was like I was looking at a stranger. Her eyes, those eyes I once thought I knew so well, were clouded with guilt, and I hated her for it. But what hurt more was how distant I'd become from myself, how much I'd lost in just a few days. The man I had been, who trusted and loved her, was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone full of rage and distrust. But it wasn't just Clara's betrayal that had my world spinning. It was James. I didn't know what to do with the hatred that had quickly rooted itself in my chest for him. He was just another man in a long line of faceless assholes who thought they could take what wasn't theirs, who thought they could slide into someone's life without consequences. But now I had a name, James, and that name felt like a knife lodged deep in my ribs. I didn't tell Clara I knew. I didn't want her to think I was weak enough to confront her directly. I had my pride, and I wasn't about to let it be crushed any further by the sight of her tear-streaked face begging for forgiveness. Not yet. I needed time. Time to think, to plan. Time to take back control. I wasn't the only one hurting, though. A few days after I discovered everything, I received a call from Sophie. I had known Sophie for years. She was a friend of Clara's, someone who had become a fixture in our lives over time. We'd shared drinks, talked about our struggles in the early days of marriage, laughed over stories of bad dates. She was always the one to offer the best advice, the calm, wise friend. But now, there was a different tone in her voice. One I hadn't heard before. "Ethan," she said, her voice trembling, "I need to talk to you. It's about Clara. And about James." I knew the moment she said his name, everything I'd been feeling was reflected in her words. "I found out about the affair too," Sophie confessed, her voice breaking. "I caught them together last week. At James's place." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Sophie had been my ally without me even knowing it. She'd watched as Clara lied, as she kept secrets. The betrayal had bled out in all directions. It wasn't just me, Sophie had lost something too. And for the first time, I didn't feel alone. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," Sophie said softly. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't want to make it worse." "No," I said, shaking my head. This isn't your fault. None of this is. It's Clara and James. I want them to pay." There was a pause on the line before Sophie spoke again, more urgently this time. "What if we made them pay? Together?" The suggestion stopped me cold. My mind raced. I had thought about revenge, of course. What man wouldn't? But there had always been something holding me back. I wasn't sure if I was strong enough to go through with it, or if I even deserved to feel that much anger. But Sophie's words were a match to the kindling in my chest. Revenge. A way to take back control, to expose the lie. I don't know what you mean, I said cautiously. Sophie hesitated. What if we gathered proof? If they think they can hide what they've done, maybe it's time we let them know how it feels to be exposed. To know they're not getting away with it. The plan was simple. Too simple, I thought. But the more I listened to Sophie, the more it made sense. Clara had been careful. She'd hidden the affair well, kept it in the shadows, away from prying eyes. But there were cracks in the facade. And together, Sophie and I could exploit those cracks. Sophie suggested we install cameras in our bedrooms. Hidden, of course. We both knew that if we wanted to prove the affair wasn't just some momentary lapse, we needed evidence. Solid, irrefutable proof. The cameras would give us that. I have a place we can use, Sophie said, her voice low, almost conspiratorial. I'll get everything we need. You don't have to worry about anything. I didn't argue. I didn't care about the logistics. All I cared about was the idea of Clara and James having no place to hide, of seeing their betrayal played out in front of me, in front of the world if I chose to expose it. They would understand what it felt like to be powerless. Over the next few days, we worked quickly. Sophie set up the cameras while I kept Clara distracted, pretending like nothing had changed. Every time she looked at me with those guilty eyes, I fought the urge to snap, to throw it all in her face. I had to hold on. This was my game now. And I wasn't going to lose. The cameras were discreet, small enough to blend in with the rest of the room. Sophie knew exactly what she was doing. She'd been in this world before. She had a friend who did surveillance, someone who had worked with private investigators. That's how she knew what would work best. We didn't talk much after we set everything up. It felt like we were both waiting for the moment when everything would come to light. The first night the cameras were in place, I didn't sleep a wink. I lay awake in bed, listening to the house, to Clara's movements, wondering if tonight would be the night she'd leave for James's apartment again. I imagined her sneaking out, thinking she was being careful, but she wasn't. She wasn't being careful anymore. None of them were. By morning I was a wreck, but it was the first step. The first piece of our revenge. We'd taken back a little bit of control, and now it was time to see if Clara would play her part. If she would slip up, if she would fall into the trap Sophie and I had set. I couldn't stop thinking about James. He didn't deserve her. He didn't deserve anyone. But it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about what Clara had done to me. What she had taken from me. It wasn't going to go unnoticed. We weren't just gathering evidence anymore. We were plotting their downfall. The days dragged on, each one feeling longer than the last. It became a routine I loathed but couldn't escape. I kept my distance from Clara, hiding behind a mask of indifference, trying to act like everything was normal. I was no actor, though, and I knew she could sense the tension between us. But she didn't ask questions. She didn't push. She just kept playing the part, pretending like nothing had changed, as if the betrayals hadn't already shattered everything. And all the while, the cameras kept recording. Sophie had been right. They'd been placed perfectly, discreetly hidden, but capturing everything. Every conversation, every touch, every moment of deceit. I didn't know how to feel anymore. There were days when I hated myself for not confronting Clara sooner, for letting things get this far. Then there were days when I was consumed by the rage, when I wanted to destroy everything she'd ever known. I couldn't decide which side of me was winning, but the wait for proof was slowly chipping away at whatever remained of the man I used to be. Sophie kept me updated. She was my constant ally, the one who understood. Her calls came at odd hours, her voice always low and cautious, as if someone might be listening. She was obsessed with the plan, obsessed with getting revenge just like me. I couldn't blame her. She had just as much to lose. And I found myself clinging to her, desperate for the solidarity, the shared goal. Together, we were something more than just victims. We were soldiers in a war that neither of us had chosen, but both of us had found ourselves in. After weeks of waiting, the first breakthrough came one Tuesday morning. I had barely gotten out of bed when Sophie's name flashed across my phone screen. "I've got something," she said, her voice tight with excitement. My heart stopped. I knew instantly what she meant. "Tell me you're not joking." "I'm not. I've watched the footage. You're not going to believe it. I couldn't breathe as I grabbed the phone tighter, my palms slick with sweat. What happened? Is it? It's there. They're both there. It's all on camera. I almost dropped the phone. For a moment, everything stood still. The world outside my bedroom window disappeared. There was only the raw, terrible weight of Sophie's words and what they meant. Proof. The thing I had been waiting for. The thing that would expose everything. And suddenly, a sickening thrill ran through me, mixed with dread. I told her I'd come over. I couldn't wait another second. I arrived at Sophie's place just after noon. Her apartment was a mess, papers and empty coffee cups scattered around, but there was a certain energy in the air. I could feel it before I even saw the footage. Sophie had been working tirelessly, reviewing the tapes, ensuring she didn't miss anything important. I walked into her living room, and there it was, the moment we'd been waiting for, ready to be played. Sophie hit a button on her laptop, and the screen flickered to life. There they were. Clara and James. In the dim light of their bedroom, Clara had undressed slowly, almost methodically. She wasn't looking at the camera, she didn't know it was there. But I did. I saw every inch of her, every movement she made, every touch she gave to James. I couldn't breathe as I watched, feeling my chest tighten. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the intimacy. The comfort she had with him. The way her hands moved across his body like she had no history with me. Like I didn't exist. James's face was almost a blur, but Clara's was clear. I could see her smile. I could see the way she looked at him, like she was completely gone. I almost wanted to look away, but I couldn't. My body was frozen, and my mind couldn't process it fast enough. This was the proof, undeniable raw. It was Clara, my wife, with another man. And for the first time, I wasn't just angry. I was sick. I was disgusted. Sophie leaned over, her hand on the mouse, ready to pause the video. I couldn't stop the question that slipped out of me. Do you think she loves him? Sophie didn't answer immediately. She just clicked the play button again, and we watched as James kissed Clara, pulling her close, the moment stretching on and on. It was like watching someone else's life, someone who had never existed, a life that had never been mine. Does it even matter? Sophie finally asked, her voice cold. What they have, what they share, it's all a lie. None of it's real. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The anger bubbling inside me was too much to put into words. This was real. What I was seeing wasn't a dream. It wasn't a nightmare. It was Clara's betrayal, captured in perfect detail. But as sick as it made me, I knew it wasn't enough. Not yet. The cameras had given us the proof, but now we needed to decide what to do with it. How would we expose them? How far would we go? Ethan, Sophie said, breaking my thoughts. We need to release the video. We can't let them think they got away with it. It's the only way to make them feel what we felt. The thought made my blood run cold. I agree, I said, my voice quiet but resolute. But we need to do it right. We need to make sure it hits them when they least expect it. No warning. No chance to cover it up. We need to watch them crumble. Sophie nodded, her expression hardening. I've been thinking about that. We can't just post it online. Not yet. Let's build the pressure. We can start by sending it to their families first. Let them see who they really are before anyone else. Let them know we know. The plan felt right. It felt like the only thing left to do. I couldn't let Clara get away with this. I couldn't let her slip back into the life we had before, pretending nothing had happened. She needed to face the consequences. And James too. He had to understand that he couldn't just take someone else's wife without consequences. Sophie helped me set up a secure email account, one that couldn't be traced back to us. We made sure everything was in place, that we would release it without a trace. No fingerprints, no mistakes. Just the undeniable truth. The day came. I was at my lowest, but also at my most powerful. I had the truth, and the truth was a weapon. Clara and James would soon learn that betrayal has a price, and I was ready to make them pay. The plan was set. Sophie and I had gone over the details 100 times, but the weight of what we were about to do still hung heavy in the air. Every time I thought about hitting send on the email, a sick feeling twisted in my stomach. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about the fall of everything I thought I knew. The fall of Clara, yes, but also the fall of who I used to be. The man who trusted, the man who believed in loyalty. I needed to focus. We needed to make them pay. But as I sat there, staring at my phone, I realized there was something else I was avoiding. It wasn't just the action of sending the video. It was the weight of everything we'd been through, the months of waiting, the shared pain, the late-night conversations with Sophie that somehow became the only thing keeping me grounded. I wasn't just angry at Clara anymore. I was angry at myself for allowing myself to be caught up in this web, for letting her betrayal twist me into someone I didn't recognize. That's when Sophie called. "You ready?" Her voice crackled through the line, sharp, but not without a note of hesitation. "I don't know," I said, sitting back on the couch, running my hands over my face. "I don't know if I'm ready to destroy everything yet." There was a silence on the other end, like she was considering her next words carefully. Then she spoke again, quieter now. "We don't have to do it all today. But you need to take a break. We need a moment. We've been doing this for weeks, Ethan. You're falling apart." The honesty in her voice was like a slap, but it wasn't untrue. I had been sinking deeper and deeper into the bitterness of this plan. The pain from Clara's betrayal had carved out a space in my chest, and I couldn't stop trying to fill it with anger. Sophie was right. I needed to breathe. I needed to separate myself from the chaos I had been living in. "What do you have in mind?" I asked, exhausted. "A hotel," Sophie said, the words almost casual. "Just for a night. We can talk through everything, away from all of this. Get some distance from the plan, and clear our heads. You and me. No cameras. Just time to think." I wasn't sure what I was expecting. I hadn't thought this through, but in the end, the idea of getting away from everything, even for a few hours, sounded like a relief. I didn't need to think about Clara. I didn't need to think about James. Just a night to be normal, to breathe. I agreed, and within the hour, I was pulling up to the hotel. Sophie was already inside, her car parked near the entrance. The night was cool, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement. I took a deep breath before entering, trying to push the weight of everything to the back of my mind. When I walked into the hotel lobby, I saw Sophie standing by the front desk, her eyes catching mine immediately. She was wearing a simple black dress, her hair pulled back loosely. She looked different. Not the way I remembered her, smiling and offering advice from a distance, but more open, vulnerable, almost. I forced a smile as I approached her. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. She smiled back, but there was a quiet understanding in her expression, like she knew how heavy this all felt. "Hey," she replied. "I'm glad you came." We took the elevator up to the room, a quiet tension hanging between us. It wasn't like we were strangers, but there was something about this setting, about being away from the people we were, that made everything feel different. More intimate. The moment we entered the room, I knew things wouldn't stay the same. The room was dimly lit, the bed large and unmade, the furniture simple but elegant. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the air conditioner. Sophie closed the door behind us. "Want something to drink?" she asked, going over to the minibar. I hesitated. "Yeah. Something strong." She handed me a glass of whiskey and poured one for herself. We clinked our glasses and sat down on the couch. The weight of everything was heavy on us both. It wasn't just the plan anymore. It wasn't just the revenge we were plotting. It was the silence that had grown between us, this unspoken bond that had formed through shared pain, shared betrayal. "I don't know if I can do it," I said suddenly, breaking the silence. "I don't know if I can go through with it. Exposing Clara like that? It feels like I'll be exposing myself too." Sophie took a slow sip of her drink, her eyes locked on mine. "You're not the one who betrayed anyone, Ethan. You don't have to feel guilty." I looked away, staring at the glass in my hand. "But I don't want to be the person who hurts her. I never wanted to be that guy. I never wanted to become someone like this." "I get it," Sophie said quietly. "But you're not the one who created this mess. Claire did. And James. You're just trying to clean it up. For both of us." I looked at her, then really looked at her. Sophie's face was softer in the dim light, her eyes reflecting the same exhaustion and frustration I'd felt for weeks. There was a distance between us, but there was also something else. An understanding. A connection. A bond that had formed not just from the pain we were feeling, but from how we'd been there for each other when no one else had been. I don't know what happened next. Maybe it was the alcohol, or maybe it was just the emotional weight that had been building between us. But without thinking, I leaned in. Sophie didn't pull away. Her breath hitched as I kissed her, tentatively at first, unsure of what we were doing. But then it deepened. There was no longer any hesitation. It wasn't the revenge we had planned, but it was raw. Honest. A release. A moment where everything else, the lies, the anger, the pain, seemed to disappear. In that moment, there was only her, only the heat of our kiss, only the closeness that had built between us over these weeks of betrayal. When we broke apart, neither of us spoke. There was no need. I didn't know what it meant, and Sophie didn't either. But we both understood one thing. Everything had changed. Our connection had gone from being a shared alliance in pain to something deeper, something I wasn't prepared for. We didn't talk about it. We didn't need to. But as the night went on, the line between our betrayal and the revenge we'd planned began to blur. The night we'd come to for clarity had only added more confusion. The moment I hit send, a strange calm washed over me. I knew what I was about to unleash, but the finality of it felt almost surreal. The email was out there, the video attached, ready to tear everything apart. I'd spent weeks planning, waiting for the right moment, for the exact evidence, and now there was no turning back. Sophie and I had made sure the message would reach the right people first, their families, their close friends, and after that, the world would know. I kept checking my phone obsessively, waiting for any signs of the storm I knew was coming. Within hours, I saw the first ripple. Clara's family had reacted first. I could tell from their calls, the way they tried to reach her, her desperate, panicked texts when she found out. It wasn't long before her professional colleagues got wind of the video. By the next morning, the news had spread like wildfire. The video was everywhere. Blogs, social media, even local news outlets were picking up on it. People were commenting, sharing, dissecting every frame. It was a disaster in slow motion, but it wasn't just Clara who was being exposed. James was just as much a part of this chaos. I tried to keep my distance, to act unaffected. But as the repercussions unfolded, I couldn't help but watch, feeling a twisted satisfaction. Clara had always been so careful, so polished, so perfect. But none of that mattered now. None of her control, her appearances, her well-kept secrets mattered in the face of the truth. I thought I'd be angry. I thought I'd feel nothing but pure, unfiltered rage as I watched her career unravel, as I watched her relationships with family and colleagues fray beyond repair. I thought I'd be vindicated. But as the days passed, as I saw the video ripple through her life, I started to feel something else. Something darker. James, too, faced the consequences of his actions. His company fired him within hours of the video going public. I saw the tweets, the memes, the sharp comments mocking him, tearing down his professional reputation. He wasn't untouchable anymore. No one was. It was like watching two lives crumble in real time, and for the first time in my life, I felt hollow. I had exacted my revenge, but what did it actually cost me? Sophie called me several times during those first few days. She was just as consumed by what we'd done as I was. At first, her voice had been full of triumph, excitement at how quickly everything had spiraled. But by the third day, it had changed. There was no more celebration in her tone, just a quiet resignation. "I don't know, Ethan," she said one night when we spoke. "We wanted them to pay. We wanted them to feel the way we felt. But I don't know. I don't know if it was worth it." Her words hit me harder than I expected. Because, deep down, I knew exactly what she meant. Revenge had its price, and it wasn't just about Clara or James anymore. It was about me, about us, the people we were becoming. We had spent weeks plotting, drinking in anger, feeding off each other's pain. But now that the dust had settled, all I had was a shattered image of my wife and the ruins of a life I had built. And Sophie? She had her own scars to bear. I wasn't the only one who'd lost something in this war. I didn't respond immediately. I couldn't. Instead, I spent the next few days in a haze, trying to figure out what came next. Clara avoided me as best as she could, her guilt a heavy thing that she couldn't hide. She couldn't look me in the eye anymore, and I didn't want her to. She had broken something between us that I couldn't even begin to understand, and as her world collapsed, I realized just how much I had lost in the process. In the end, I got what I wanted. The video had done its job. Clara's career was over, her family couldn't look at her without disgust, and James's reputation was shredded beyond repair. But the satisfaction I thought I would feel never came. Instead, there was a cold, gnawing emptiness that settled in the pit of my stomach. I had been so certain, so sure of myself when I first set the plan in motion. But now, I didn't know who I was anymore. The consequences of my actions were everywhere, and for the first time in months, I wasn't sure I had the strength to face them. I had won, but it didn't feel like winning. It felt like losing something much more important, something I couldn't name. And when I looked at Sophie, I saw the same question in her eyes. The same doubt.
Bye.